To news update from Talking in Stations. I'm Matterall. I'm here with Ash Dorothy. How's it going, Ash?
How's it going, man?
Really good. We're going to talk about the news that's out there in EVE Online on July 2nd, right before July 4th weekend, and some of the current conversations that are going on in our TIS public channel on Discord. You can check that out all at talkinginstations.com. Find your way to the content, the podcasts, the videos, and the Discord, which you can see a lot of different people participating in conversations. Okay, so yeah, let's go back to where we left off the other day on the drifters. Oh, wiggle, wiggle. So let's go and bring ourselves back up to date on where we were, and that was drifters invaded a few systems in Null-sec. I guess it was 3 systems. I don't know. There's a lot of systems invaded. A few of them were highly populated, and this drew up a strong reaction from Null-sec powers, who said they were going to. First of all, they were angry about this. They thought it was the wrong direction for the game, for NPCs, or basically the in-game environment, to be attacking players' structures and threatening them. None have been destroyed. Well, none significant have been destroyed. I think there have been a few things destroyed here and there.
My understanding was at least one, but it was an in syllabus jump gate. And to my understanding, and probably somebody can correct me, it was already injured. They just happened to be there when it was like finally vulnerable, or
Okay.
was without fuel, one of the two.
Interesting. I didn't know that. And that was the only thing?
That's been the only thing. So I haven't heard anything about anything new since like Sunday, so I'm pretty sure that's it.
Okay. And the reaction to that has been, we've seen a lot of it because it's happened here in Discord, but
Oh, Jintan is saying one Sino jump beacon and one jump bridge that were both low power, which is
all right.
why they were able to kill it immediately.
So they're not really damaging a lot of things. They're basically attempting to damage a lot of things, but they're being held off. I think what I've seen from Tuzzy yesterday was like, well, first of all, there's the, as Matani calls it, hair on fire. This is terrible. To Tuzzy, who is the logistic expert, doing a lot of the work of keeping the drifters off of them, saying like it's kind of boring gameplay because all it takes is a missile. You just have to lead the drifters into missile range and then you shoot them, and that's that. It's super easy. We also had Marathi on here last week, or last show, talking about how you could use fleets, cruiser fleets, to take them on. You needed about 40 people and you could wipe them out pretty easy. But it's a consistent thing. It happens over and over again. The NPCs or the environment or the game doesn't get tired like normal people, so it's an unfair advantage that you have to just keep putting these people, keep putting these things off over and over and over again without any rewards is also another criticism. These people have, they don't get anything out of it. There's no loot dropped or anything like that. So that's where some of the criticism was. Now, pivot to last Sunday, the Imperium said, I'm sitting in here with NC and Horde, our natural enemies. We're all Null-sec together. They joined a Discord called Null-sec First. And that Discord, they're planning an invasion of some sort of their own. And that invasion will take place in the high-sec, where they will destroy the manufacturing base of players who are non-aligned and who live in high security space and don't participate in, say, Null-sec, although there may be some crossover. But essentially, Null-sec is declaring war on high-sec, and they're going to destroy their gameplay for 2 reasons. One is, and we'll get to that in a second, it's a cash grab because it's going to further consolidate money into the hands of Null-sec people. But second, and what they say it's for, is to send a signal to CCP saying this is bad gameplay. We can't do anything about it, so we're going to punish other players in EVE Online so that they will be uncomfortable too, and they can complain to you about why it's happening. And so that's the strategy, I believe, that's been laid out for this. Ashtrathi, what did I miss?
I think you nailed it.
Nailed it. Okay. There's probably some stuff there, but what's interesting to me about this is there's some clear lines of what they're trying to do. And by they, I mean the Imperium, because they seem to be leading this effort. Vili on this program last time said that, yeah, basically Matani led this effort, and they essentially formed the Null-sec First Discord. And think about that name, Null-sec First. It's pretty arrogant, I would say, if you're talking to all the player base, right? And so let's figure out, is this a problem for the entire game? Is this a problem for Null-sec? Are there victims here? Is this just bad CCP design? I hear a lot of that. I think I caught a former CSM member, the judge, I don't think I did, saying to a CCPer who was saying, go drifters, or something like that, that he was like, hey, you ought to be careful now that you belong to CCP. You ought to be careful what you say. Because, and the way he put it gently was, you shouldn't celebrate something that a lot of a player segment is angry about, or something like that. And I'm just went,
Hey, Matterall.
yeah.
That thing that I thought was going to happen in 40 minutes is happening right now. I'll be right back.
All right, man, take off. All right, let me light up some crew members here. Oh, I got themselves muted. So I don't know, but it just seems to me like there's a whole movement to make sure that CCP feels the heat. They want CCP to feel the heat. There's no other way to change CCP minds except for them to actually have to deal with a lot of complaints or a lot of tickets that their workers are overwhelmed. I don't know, but they're applying pressure, not unlike they did in 2011. If we go back to 2011, that was called the Summer of Rage, and the reason, actually, I think I can find that. What happened there was that the players, EVE Online, Summer of Rage, actually wrote this article with my friends Noisy Gamer and Dirk McGurk for INN when I was there. It's a team effort. We really broke down the Summer of Rage. You can see there's a timeline and graphs on what happened when, and it was really a period of weeks where there was a lot of anger, and the anger came from the announcement that Dust was going to be played on PS3. It also came from terrible DDoS attacks from Lulz boats. Those guys actually got busted and arrested. One of them was an EVE player that was in the middle of the demise of Brave Coalition, if you remember that. He was the broker. And so that guy, young man, he was like 15, was DDoSing EVE for weeks, 2 weeks or so. And then you had the Incarna expansion arrive right at the end of that. And we're talking, June 8th through June 21. That was actually 8 years ago, right about now. And when that happened, players were already upset about a number of things. But then they saw this, what they considered a CCP cash grab in the form of microtransaction experimentation. And what that meant was that CCP at the time was trying to experiment in how to monetize different things, how to make money, basically, instead of charging a subscription, which was the old way that MMOs made money. But what happened was that was seen as an attempt to do what other groups were doing already, which was basically nickel and diming players for every little advantage. And there are some examples of that. I'm not that familiar with the examples, but I've heard that World of Tanks or World of Warships, you basically paid for better ammo that did more damage. And EA was known for doing stuff like that too, where they basically decided they were going to charge you for advantages in the game. And that was not a direction that EVE players wanted to go. So there was a big protest about that because, first of all, they didn't like the idea of microtransactions changing the game to be a pay-to-win model. And at the same time, you had more bad news upon more bad news come out. You had an internal memo, which is basically like a newsletter inside of the company. And this episode that had come out was called "Greed is Good?" ? So they're internally debating the pluses and minuses of microtransactions. And it's the newsletter itself is called Fearless, and it went around a few times. Probably a pet project that got the green light somewhere. It's like, let's do a newsletter inside here so we can debate, a lot of the trends that are out there. And that newsletter this month, again, this is 8 years ago about this time, was called Greed is Good. And in it was somebody arguing for, somebody arguing against. Well, what the community of players did here in EVE Online is they took the part where somebody was arguing forcefully for microtransactions and what the Noble Exchange store, which is what it was called at the time, would be, and that people would pay, whales would pay money for virtual items just like they would in real life. So if you like designer jeans because you want to distinguish yourself as a designer jean person, a person who could afford designer jeans, then you would be willing to pay a lot for that. And so that's what they were talking about philosophically. Even if it's a virtual item, it's still an item of status. And so you would pay actually $80 for a pair of jeans in the game. And this just was a big problem because EVE Online wasn't really about that. It was about old money. Like if you were here before and you had worked your way up, you didn't want to be eclipsed by people who had real money that could eclipse you. And then next you had all kinds of things just started falling. You had CCP and Zulu come out and call CSM. Now, here is why this is all important. There's a huge amount of unrest among a lot of players who are unhappy with the Incarnate expansion, right? Because Incarnate expansion comes out right in the middle of this. Actually, yeah, June 21st. And that expansion was really, really problematic. And here's why. One is you could no longer log into the game without going into this new portal where you're an active little avatar, except that was so CPU intensive or GPU intensive that a lot of machines would overheat, and their fans would rev up and it would be incredibly loud. So that was incredibly a bad experience for somebody who from one day to the next came in to play the game. They usually come into a ship. Their ship they could spin around and then they could undock or not undock. Now they had to come into this scenario that they didn't want to play. And to get out of it, they had to walk. They couldn't even run their character to where the ship was. There was only one room. The room didn't have a door that opened to anything, so there was no gameplay there. You could just look around the room and get out of the room, and there was no quick way out. So right away what CCP did is, because that was basically it, they felt forced upon, right? They have this new environment that's forced upon them that's not good for their computers, and so they wanted to be able to have the ship view back. So the first thing they did is allowed you just to see the ship view, which you couldn't spin the ship, you could just look at it, and you could log into that so that your machine didn't burn down while you were trying to play the game. And the next thing they did is they brought back ship spinning, and then they made the quarters optional later on. But the point is that people came into the game trapped, and so there was a lot of anger about CCP forcing me into something that I don't want to do and I don't want to participate in. So there's a lot of people who are upset. And at the beginning of all this, at the front of all this, is CSM being very vocal, right? So you have the Matani, who is the chairman, being very vocal about the dissatisfaction with this whole direction of the game. and there's a lot of like what's going on now. It's a lot of like churning up the anger of the people. So that happened 8 years ago exactly now. And what happened was 27,000 people, I think, or 27,000 accounts unsubbed in a period of like 3 months or less during the summer. And I think that really shocked CCP. They really thought like, uh-oh, we broke this thing. We've lost confidence. We need to react. And you saw after that an incredible amount of, first of all, you had an apology letter on June 26th. Then you had an emergency CSM summit. As you can see, there's a famous picture of Zulu, who actually works at Riot. I saw him a few times. Never talked to him, but I saw him at my coffee shop. And then the unsubs started to happen, and then there was 100 people laid off by that October from CCP because, well, who knows what? It's the company's responsibility to make money, not lose money. And I don't think the subscriptions played into that, except, well, maybe that's not true because you don't necessarily need the money right away. But if you know you're not going to get the money later, then you're going to have to make preemptive actions. So the layoffs might have been something that was important to the health of the company overall. Clearly, it was important for that reason. And I think maybe the people unsubbing actually damaged the company at that time. I think that's a pretty easy assumption to make, but we don't know. We don't know their books. Okay, so keep all that in mind. June 8th to June 28th, essentially 20 days of damage to CCP leads to this huge unsubbing, and people are super mad about it. And at the front of it all is Matani, who is in front of the CSM, and the CSM is telling CCP, what are you doing? Wrong direction, and a whole list of grievances. CCP then, after all that damage is done, changes directions and says, we're going to balance this game. Here's a huge list of stuff that we need to fix that people have complained about. Let's just start knocking that out. And so the Crucible expansion and the expansions after that are all about fixing the game that they are playing, spaceships in space, right? No more Incarna.
We're talking about
kind
the
of stuff.
Summer of Rage.
This is the 2011 Summer of Rage. Yeah, that's what.
Yeah. So what ended up happening with that last piece was basically CCP Soundwave had this little book in which he wrote down all of his, like, it was like the earlier version of the Little Things project. It was his side things that he kept track of that he knew that people wanted and he wanted, but like would take a few dev cycles, so maybe you could sneak one here or there. So when Incarna crashed and burned, they had a 5-year plan based on all of this, right? So that entire plan burned. So he basically brought out the book and said, this is our next expansion.
Yep. Next 3 expansions, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was definitely like a change in direction. And I think at that point you can say that EVE Online benched their art director, Torfi Franz, who later moved on to Microsoft to work on Minecraft. But at that point, the vision that they were talking about with basically a science fiction world and open gameplay where games would mix, like Dust would mix with Eve, would mix with whatever was coming next. All that kind of integration and interesting possibilities for the future were kind of thrown out the window because guys just wanted to shoot ships in space. And to me, that was a directional shift that affected EVE Online for the next 8 years.
Well, there's another big part of it, which is that CCP was working on a new game engine, Carbon. And that's what was like all of this was based on. So you have Walking in Stations that was supposed to be the beginning of Carbon, and then Dust 514 and World of Darkness were both also supposed to be like done in the Carbon engine. They'd already done like stuff with NVIDIA. If you go look at there's some videos of like NVIDIA tests with World of Darkness character models and stuff.
Yeah.
So this was going to be a big thing. They're going to try to contend with Unreal Engine, and ultimately this completely ruined. This was arguably their first like attempt to widen their base and make themselves into more than just EVE Online.
Mm-hmm.
And so secretly, that not secretly, but in the sidelines, that whole project went away.
Yeah. And
And that
they're
has long-lasting damage to both World of Darkness and changes to Dust. Sorry.
yeah, World of Darkness then got basically sold off later on, and Dust was not updated for PS4, and I think they tried to change it into something else, but they basically put that on life support. Even though it made a little profit, it was no longer actively really invested in. Instead, I think they turned their attention to this thing called virtual reality, and they started moving in that direction. And so that's what happened in 2011. It has parallels to here because you have a high profile person in the Mittani leading the charge against CCP. And you have similar this time around. And make no mistake, this is the kind of temperature people angry about a thing that was around in 2011. Last year we had a summer of discontent, or a late summer, was late spring discontent. I don't know. Dirk kind of made up a joke about it. It was really funny because it was like, oh, this isn't anger. Like, you haven't seen anger yet. But this one feels different. This one feels like there's a movement afoot to make sure that CCP changes direction on something. And this is very much the players wanting CCP to listen to them, and they're going to find different ways to do that. It seems like a bit of a reaction that was an overreaction, right? It was a very strong reaction. There was declarations about what was going to happen. There would be null-sec war on high-sec, et cetera, et cetera. And lo and behold, CCP turns off the drifter faucet because yesterday there were no drifter attacks. And I don't think we've seen one today. This isn't the first time. If CCP is saying, okay, we heard you, we're calming this down, this isn't the first time they've done that. There was when Phoebe jump nerfs came out, they were severe. They were making it so you couldn't jump even with jump freighter any further than 5 light years, which would have terribly restricted empires that were built far away from trade hubs. Would have been a much, much different supply line situation. And there was a lot of uproar about that. So they took that part out and allowed jump freighters to continue to jump twice that length, 10 light years. And so you still have those massive supply lines. And there's been other cases as well where CCP has reacted to the player base being upset about something. So if that's what's happened here, that's what's happened. But let's take a look at
Hey, so first of all, I do disagree that this is like the Summer of Rage for several reasons.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Ash stepped away.
All right, sorry, I'm back. Okay, so I disagree that it is a allegory to the Summer of Rage for several reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And also, as far as the drifter attack stopping, I do agree that not just null-sec, but when any section of space truly unifies to send a message to CCP about a change, that something is wrong with it, CCP has often listened to that. Most often I see this with wormholes, with things like that rig that got added because they changed Hicks in a way that broke them rolling wormholes in a really odd like edge case. So they added a rig so that way they could still do it. Asset safety was originally going to be in wormholes, and then they asked for it to not be, and they got it. So when an entire section of space unifies, they tend to listen to that. That being said, it is possible that the attacks were supposed to go on until Wednesday and then
Mm-hmm.
transition to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's also, just as I was saying, it was premature to make long-term predictions about what this is going to look like when it first started. I still think that this is probably premature to make assumptions about whether or not any of this is intentional or reactionary or planned or whatever. It could be that like whatever they just planned a week of shock and awe, and then halfway through the week realized that they weren't getting quite the intended reaction that they wanted. I'm sure that they wanted to frustrate Null and to make them have to deal with this new complicated threat, but I'm sure that it also went way further than they expected. So it could be that they just pulled back because they didn't necessarily like that wasn't what the intention of
Right.
this stage of the feature is.
Well, we
It
don't
also
know.
could the third possibility though
Yeah.
is that as the week went on, more and more buggy behavior of the drifters has been described. And so what has happened in Invasion so far is when something is not working, they will pull it for a little bit so that way they can fix it. That's what they did with Majors.
Okay. So that's one of the things. Let's talk about some of the ways that Null-sec is discrediting this gameplay. They're saying it's poorly implemented, it's buggy, it doesn't do what it was intended to do, which was destroy structures that are everywhere that need to be removed because nobody's using them anymore. These are the types of things that we've heard, right?
Well, I would
Yeah,
like to
but
caution people that the intention of it, any intention that we have about the drifters is completely conjecture. No one knows anything. CCP, I mean, like even CSM is saying that CCP is not talking to them about it. Literally, nobody knows exactly what the intent is of this feature of what's happening right now or of the broader feature.
Amar, you're in here too?
yeah, I am. Hello.
Hi, did you want to say something?
Well, I was, but Ash is stealing all of my lines so far. So
All right, good. You guys are
I
in.
guess.
All right, I'll take
Good.
a pause then.
No, don't. It's fine. So one of the narratives is that it's broken, that these things are able to do things that normal players couldn't do, that they're not normal players. They have no stamina. They can continue to come constantly uh, and invade constantly and just basically not ever tire. But also, they can't be scanned down. They can't be struck preemptively. You can't shut them off in any way. I'm wondering, Ash, if you think that any of those criticisms are, uh, I don't know, fair or reasons to stop the invasions.
Absolutely. If you wanted to analyze this as a feature, like as a thing that happened that's supposed to be doing something in the game, like on a long-term basis, as many null-seckers seem to be trying to calculate it, then absolutely, there's some serious problems with it. The fact that you, one second.
Yeah, no.
The fact that you can't descan them,
Mhm.
and the fact that there's no loot means that this is an extraordinarily two-dimensional feature. This is basically weather, like it's raining, right? So hold on.
No, man. Be a dad. Be a dad. That's awesome. All right, we'll give
Well,
him
I
room.
can continue a bit if you want to,
Sure, go ahead.
because if you summarize it, if you look at it, the complete thing we have, and also confronting at the moment. So Ash mentioned that there's no real loot being given by actually fighting them. It's completely random. You can't really see any gameplay patterns that you can adjust to. It's all reactive, and it's not very engaging. Basically, how people tend to fight them now, or at least what the Imperium does successfully, is that they have this group of structure gunners just flying around the space, chasing after them, and
Well, no,
then
there's fleets flying in horde space.
yeah,
You can see them getting shot. Test is saying they're having a great time, or at least somebody from Test that works with us is saying they're having a great time fighting these things
yeah.
off.
Ron was praising it and saying they were having a lot of fun. I think, of course, it also depends on how you approach a gameplay aspect. So if you're gonna go in and say this is going to be shit, of course it's gonna be shit as well. But yeah, absolutely. Pandemic Horde was using cormorants and destroyers to fight them off. I think they lost. Was it yesterday? Or, no, not yesterday. Sunday maybe, when they lost like 4 billion worth of destroyers fighting drifters.
Yeah, it's a lot of
But
destroyers.
but I mean, when you combine all of it, like there's no real way to actually end them. It's not like the forward operating bases where you could actually destroy that structure and they go away. So you don't have that kind of stuff going on, or an incursion or invasion where you can actually actively gameplay it. There's also the bugs that has been reported that they are not I have yet to see any actual evidence from it. There's a very good article on Imperial News where you can read about a summarization of what we actually know of the drifters and what we speculate on and that kind of stuff. But there has been some people mentioning that they have that they go beyond the damage caps and structures, that they are having very absurd amounts of tracking and range for the guns, but that seems I've yet to see the evidence of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hi, I'm back. So, first of all, yeah, I believe that some at least some of the things that Null-sec is reporting as being a bug of drifter behavior is probably intentional. I expect that the fact that the drifters can beat damage cap may be intentional, just because it seems like something that they would have to intentionally do. Although Anasir has some theories as to why it's happening as a bug, so maybe it is a bug.
Mm-hmm.
But some other things, like the fact that as soon as they go into warp, they become immune, as opposed to most things that need to align first. That feels like something that might actually be intentional, because the drifters use different propulsion systems than other people. So, like, just like the Triglavians, we've been noticing that the Triglavians break the rules as well in certain ways, especially when it comes to warping.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very difficult to tell what is a bug and what is a clue at this point. Basically, we're just going to have to see, if they do come back, which behaviors have been changed, and those are the ones that were probably the bugs.
Yeah.
And that's just the way they work. One of the things I do find really interesting is the comment about high tracking. And the reason why that's weird is because drifters have famously been able to be defeated by tracking. That's how you defeat them in the Abyss. That's how, in theory, you beat them in normal fights. So the fact that they have high tracking feels wrong to me, based on my knowledge of drifters.
Yeah, but I mean, it does seem a bit like, I mean, all of this is just speculation. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's worth noting, because we don't actually know, and I think that's part of the problem as well in terms of people reacting to this,
Mm-hmm.
because there's so many unknowns, and still people are going rear and being upset about it. We don't know if this is going to last forever. If it's going to last 1 week. We don't know what's intentional, what's a bug. We don't know if this is just a first iteration that will expand to something that is actually worthwhile doing. We have no idea, and still we've jumped to conclusions that CCP is incompetent and we're going to burn HiSec and impact retention due to it. So I think that's part of the problem. But
Yeah.
when you look at the drifters themselves, to me, they appear to be the ones you find in wormholes, and they basically use those mechanics that those drifters use with the same kind of stats and weaponry and all that stuff, and they just put it into nullsec and then added a different type of behavior to
They're
it.
actually very different. We asked a wormhole guy what he thought of this,
Okay.
and he said no,
Yeah.
they're completely different, different creatures. The drifters in wormhole space are different than the ones that are invading null-sec space, and their loot's different. Their ability to damage is different, et cetera, et cetera. But
so to make sure
Yeah.
everyone knows, this is not the first time that drifter fleets have attacked structures.
yeah,
Arataka Research Consortium's structures had come under drifter fire at least twice in before this happened. So this is they have experimented with this, and they are Apollo, Artemis, and Orion Tyrannos, which would imply that they are similar to the ones in K-space.
types of drifters. Those are the names of drifters.
Right.
So what's interesting, this makes a lot of sense. Like, the guys that are most interested in drifters are this group of guys that play the game and are really into the lore of the game and the backstory. And they're always looking for stuff. They're the ones that are uncovering a lot of the Triglavian mystery for us. That consortium, if they've been attacked, could it have been a test from CCP to say, like, let's test things on those guys?
That's what we're assuming. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the pieces of this invasion system has been tested over the course of the last 2 years or so, either through events, with special mechanics in an event just to see whether or not it works, or isolated incidents with, like, lore groups, not just Arataka, but also Pi and other people that have, and likewise, also, like, there's been, drifter tests all along, and they've always been somewhat unrewarding. Things like the drifter hives, which have or very low intrinsic value to them, but is a good place for CCP to test drifters on people.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense to me. Okay, so what we've seen though since then is a couple of things. One is a reaction from CCP appears to be that from the environment, that the drifters have kind of stopped.
Right.
And the other reaction is some CSM member. You remember that a week ago or last Saturday, one of the CSM members, Arith, was saying that the entire CSM is agreeing that this is bad. And here you have a CSM member, Sutonia, right? Because the new CSM hasn't been put into place yet. So this is the old CSM he must have been talking about. If he's talking about the new one, they're not all in agreement because I talked to them. I talked to some of them. Maybe 9 out of 10 are. Maybe Steve Rnukin is thinking this is bad gameplay, but not from my understanding of other people. And if he was referring to the old CSM that's actually still officially in their seats, here is Sutonia basically saying, here's the reason that everyone loves drifters.
Here's an amazingly well-written post.
It's a well-written post. I wouldn't call it amazing, but it is well-written because he takes it from the point of view of players that were from small gang environments. And he's saying, look, the game has shifted for a while now since Citadels towards big gameplay where you build your defenses and then you don't actually have to defend. You just have overwhelming force and you build a community of people that sit around and wait for something to happen. So what that's done is it's choked off the gameplay that other people had, which was to roam around and disrupt. And in doing so, and it's funny because the SOV, they call it Fuzzy SOV, but it's actually Aegis SOV, the Aegis expansion. That sovereignty system that's in place now was made for harassment gameplay. That was one of the goals they had. But he's saying that with the nullification of with interceptors being able to get through bubbles, there's no way to gate camp those guys. So those guys zip around. That's their travel scepter. And then you have ship caches in different places. So you really can't stop a group from coming in and getting to their dread bomb and attacking your ships and stuff like that, I guess. But essentially, you don't need to be proactive to defend your space. And it's true. You really don't need to be proactive if you have a group of guys that are sitting around on their capital ships, the capital umbrella, we call it. Then he goes on to talk about Citadels and the timers and how they're mistimed. Good read if you can get to it. We'll put it in links right now. I think the reason it's not a great article is because it doesn't go far enough. It tells you from one point of view about another, but it's not comprehensive, which I wish it would have been. Maybe that's yet to be written. Okay.
I see.
Okay, so that's just one point of view saying now the drifters are filling in the spot of what PvPers used to do because PvPers can't do it anymore. So now they threw the drifters in there to disrupt, to try to make it harder for empires to sit there and just generate wealth. So the last thing I want to point out before we open up a Q&A or whatever is the reaction from the Imperium and Null First Discord, which includes all the Null-sec players from the Imperium, starting with the Imperium and Bastion and Northern Coalition and Horde. I don't know if PL's in there, but they would probably be listening. Maybe they're kicking around ideas. But you have Vili in there, I'm sure, from Test and some of those officers there. And you have even Fraternity and basically all the big Null players right now. And there's about 5 of those. And this Null First Discord, they're kicking around ideas on how to react to this. And not in a strategic way, but in a meta way. How do we get our point to CCP? They're not talking. CCP is not talking to CSM, which we control because we're Null-sec, right? 9 out of 10 of them are essentially from Null-sec, or 8 out of 10 of them. So they're not being listened to. So how do we talk to them in a way to say we're dissatisfied with the amount of pressure you're putting on our players? It's going to burn them out. And how do they do that? And one of the ways they've suggested they do that is to punish other players to make it a big mess. And in doing so, they've said, we're going to attack high sec. These are some of the ways we can do it. The Imperium is looking for ways to disrupt the market. And I think Matani said, we're not going after Plex yet. And that was pretty striking because you're not supposed to go after Plex. If you go after Plex and manipulate it, you start to get into bannable offense territory. So you got to be very careful with manipulating Plex. So for him to say yet, I think maybe he's saying like, we'll leave that arrow in the quiver because everything's on the table. And so it might be a way of tough talking, but be very careful with manipulating Plex, not just Imperium, but anyone. And
I would
did he actually say that though? Did he actually say?
Yeah, he said it last Sunday. Or sorry, it was the recording of him talking to his players. I think that's called Fireside Chats.
So I would caution also to saying that the Mittani has historically said such things for the market reaction such words bring. Not necessarily that they even have to do something, but it's just like when CCP mentions a ship's name in some sort of speech, that ship's price goes all haywire without even any other details. When the Mittani says we might come after something, that alone could spur some instability.
Yeah, it's possible, but he did say yet, so I thought that was pretty. It was a notable thing. It's like, be careful, don't touch that third rail, or CCP will have little choice but to discipline the rest of the community through you as an example. And it's happened to him before, so you need to be careful. The second thing I thought was notable is we're going to go in there and we're going to destroy the building capability of high-sec or low-sec. And so they have a target list that, if you look, there's somebody who's been accumulating structures that can be scanned, so you can see what they have in there. You can see if they have building materials, if they have T2 rigs and stuff that's expensive for infrastructure so that they can build. If they have that, it can be scanned and known. So you want to target those and destroy them because you know that's where most of the industry is happening. And that's what they want to do, is disrupt high-sec industry to make prices go up, because then they can actually clamp down and cartelize the economy. And that's one of the things that they have on the table. So they did, in fact, say, Imperium members, look at the market and see how you can disrupt it. Look for opportunities of disruption. In the meantime, I'm sure they're delivering war packages or target packages for Null-sec to attack north, south, east, wherever, people who are building in high-sec. And that's going to be a double squeeze, right? And then they're going to destroy every freighter, jump freighter they can get their hands on, probably. That's just speculation. They didn't say they were going to do that. And I thought, well, that sounds kind of far-fetched. All of Null-sec agreeing? This seems fairly far-fetched. But I contacted people from the north, and some wrote back and said, yeah, that we're doing that. And there was even a ping that came out of NC saying the pub, what was it? The pub attack is about to begin, or something like that. And that came from Vince himself. So whether he was joking or not, I have no idea. But there seems to be some truth to it that Null-sec is attacking high-sec.
So
go ahead.
There's a couple things I wanted to say. Something I was trying to say earlier, which is that all of these things about the drifters, right? The fact that they cannot be scanned down, and therefore there's no real counterplay. The fact that, all of those things that make it a two-dimensional feature, I believe, point to the fact that this is not the feature. We didn't get any patch notes for it. There's no explanation of how it works. This is nothing like an actual long-term thing. So I strongly predict that this is just one step in an evolution, because that seems to be the way that things have been. So, that's the first piece of it. And if that's true, what I wonder is if whatever happens on Wednesday is interesting and changes it in such a way that gives interesting gameplay to Null-sec, what will that do to this campaign? Will it take the wind out of some of the group sails? Will some group decide to continue on while others, will they continue to be unified? And if it changing to being something cool is not enough to stop it, then what really are you going for? What is the goal? What is the behavior that the actions are meant to?
What action? CCPs or
No,
Null-sec?
the protest conflict.
Well, let's look into that because Amar dug something up that I thought was very telling, and this is the meta show on May 4th, which is a full month ago, before any of this was happening.
Is it entered HiSec? But
let's see if we can actually.
3 months ago, even.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was it 3 months ago? Okay.
Move over. The downside is,
well, I guess, isn't it? Wait, 2 months? Jesus, 2 months ago.
May, yeah, April, May, June. Oh, 2 months now. Yeah, you're right. Let me actually get the link where it starts. Let's see if we can hear it.
Is it entered HiSec? But where this gets really interesting is if you project out in the meta, let's say 6 months, a year. Let's say we have a nice little war in Null-sec, and after that war, we all sit down and decide, what do we want to do next collectively as the null powers? How about instead of another war in Null-sec, we go into HiSec and we say, let's expand the program. Let's kill all the Satoyos, or let's kill any EC that is producing that isn't ours, and let's cartel all of the HiSec production if we wanted. Like, you could do that within a few jumps of JITA and monopolize that market. So that'll be interesting to see if Null decides, do we like this model? Do we make enough money from it? And let's all fund ourselves from HiSec by oppressing them. That would be fun.
And one question I have, and this is...
So that was very telling because this plan was on the table for something to do in any case 2 months ago, right? This plan, and I'm sure it wasn't the brilliant, like, boop, we have an idea. Let's attack HiSec. Of course it was a plan, right? But it was actually a publicly stated plan. And so the idea is it's a money grab, right? And this is a good opportunity. This is a good opportunity to do that money grab and feel justified in doing it. Because now you have to justify it to your own people, not necessarily HiSec. HiSec doesn't care why you're killing them. Your people do, right? Because even when NC would attack Providence, I'd sit out those campaigns because I didn't like the Providence. And even though we were having fun and harassing them, and they liked it too, I didn't feel like it was just. It was my own personal inside code. And I think there's a lot of players in the Imperium that might feel the same way. Like, I don't really want to kill HiSec. I was just in HiSec. I have, I came out of there and I have good memories of it. There are people in Bastion who, like Commander A's, who were trying to raise their own little corporation and in HiSec, but it was too brutal because of the war deck mechanics, so people would just log off. And so I have a feeling that there's a lot of communication needs to happen to their own people on why this is good. But as you've heard, this is a collective of Null-sec saying, let's move in even harder. And they've already done this before. As you can see, there was fighting over the offshoring markets and perimeter between Horde and later between Test, right? And they fought over it for a few months. And then they said, you know what? Neither of us are really getting anywhere. We might as well combine our forces and just split up the money. And so Vili got some money and Gobbins got some money. And that whole place is essentially locked down for them to extract money off of the Plex sales and the injector sales. And they make really billions and billions and billions a week, hundreds of billions a month. And that money is divided up into Null-sec. And then you also have, and that money split up, among the North and the South. And now you have an opportunity to make even more money. And I'll tell you how to do it. By restricting the amount of building potential that HiSec can do, and then restricting the moon mining minerals that actually constitute T2 production. And so you then monopolize T2 production. It won't be a perfect monopoly because you can't do that, but you definitely will influence the market. And if you can influence your people, which I don't think they've been able to do yet, but if they're able to tell the Imperium, do not sell your T2 material to JITA, we're turning the faucet off. If Aerith and the Imperium can actually control that, the market prices for those is going to go really high. And if the North does it too, even higher. And if Winter Coalition does it too, even higher. And so at that point, T2 production has too many obstacles to make it worthwhile doing. And then you actually, you're either making a lot of money because people are trying to break that embargo, or you're actually bringing it to a halt, which is possible, what the plan is. But why would you do that? I'll tell you why. And here's the last part of it. I'll tell you why. I think what they want to do is this is a good opportunity to be a victim and to victimize at the same time. And this is how you convince a lot of people to do something that is ethically against what they actually want to do. So look out for that. And I think that it's definitely going to play right into Imperium's pocketbook because they own a lot of the T2 materials. I think if you look at jump freighters, you can see 444444, which is the signal that Aerith sends when he buys stuff. So he's definitely into the high-end T2 material market, at least in jump freighters. So why? Because those absorb the most amount of T2 materials, which they have a plethora of, and it will keep their prices from dipping too low in the South. So in other words, you have all this material, you need to use it. So what are you going to pump it into? Well, pump it into the thing that takes the most amount of material to build, which is a capital T2 ship. So that's probably a way of essentially taking over jump freighter market. And at that point, you can turn it on and off, I think, if you own that as a monopoly, which is hard to do, but it's possible.
I wonder how many of their own alts' stuff they will destroy if they burn high-sec.
Quite a few.
Yeah, I mean,
well, you can always let those go through, but just not,
right. But well, they may not know, like, unless there's one master list, in which case, who's controlling the master list? How do you know that everyone's alts are registered? Are you really going to give the Imperium a list of all of your alts and what structures they own? And furthermore, that's listening to what I just heard about what Aerith was planning. The fact that this didn't spring free form out of nowhere, but was a planned strategy that the Imperium was going to do that they're now just letting everybody else in on. It sounds to me like, when they do something like this, as you were just pointing out, they've already figured out how to make money on it, and they figured it out locked in, and it's baked into the plan. So if everybody else supports that plan, all you're doing is basically doing their work for them and making sure that their action is more effective.
It's like a way of making other Null-sec entities in the end puppets to the Imperium, kind of. If you want to, it's far-fetched saying that, but it's in that direction. But one thing, it's worth noting that this isn't something new. It's no new plan of Aerith. Quite a few know that he has grand schemes in terms of because he's a very intelligent player and he really knows his industry and the markets and the meta surrounding it on a macro level. But there's one thing he mentions which is very important, and that is if we can get the rest of Null-sec to do this with us, if they think it's a good thing to do, it could be really interesting. And the problem is that the rest of Null-sec has usually had zero interest in high-sec because you can't really get good fights in high-sec. You can't own the SOV. You can't really play the high-scale empire-building stuff in high-sec. So they needed a catalyst. They needed a trigger to actually get the other Null-sec entities to go ahead and join them into this endeavor. And this just happened to be the perfect excuse for doing it. The Drifter invasion, where they would use the narrative of bad CCP, you screwed up, we're gonna protest. And the reality is, Ash, you were mentioning,
let me interrupt you. I think it's essential that when you're trying to motivate a large group of people, you need to have them feel like victims. And that's something that the Imperium has done very well over a long period of time, right? If ever you hear Matani speaking about his people and protecting his people, it's always from a very defensive place. Like, we need to survive in this game. We were told we'd be eradicated from this game. And that is a good motivator for people because they feel righteous in their action.
The enemy is both weak and strong.
Yeah. And that's what you're seeing. I think, actually, I was looking at that, Tuzzy saying, like, on the one hand, you have this is terrible. Null-sec is, we're burning people out. It's terrible. Oh, it's so easy to do. Like, there's basically both. And they both could be true. that, yeah, it's easy to do, but only 5 people can do it because only 5 people have permissions to gun. Let's say that's an exaggerated example. So both can be true, but that's kind of what you see. It's like, well, there's a little bit of I don't know, split personality about what we're supposed to feel. Is this easy? Are you guys able to handle it, or is it difficult and you need CCP to back off? Like, which one is it?
That actually reminds me real funny. The one thing about the drifter attacks is that every single time I've drilled down to like what's actually the problem, it always comes down to some failure in their own infrastructure, like only having 5 gunners, right?
Mhm.
So if you only have 5 gunners, then congratulations, you're not prepared against an attack. So if you're just mad that you got attacked, then that's, the drifter, none of the drifters attacks would have any impact if the space was actually secured correctly.
But to be fair as well, like
I don't know if
from
that's
what we've seen
true.
from the drifters, they are really bad gameplay implementation. Like if we were to see this stuff going down in HiSec, I doubt that anyone would really find it entertaining, because it seems
Ron
like
is
if you
here.
compare it to Invasion.
Yeah, okay, hold on. But let's bring Ron in a second, because Ron is somebody who's been actually fighting drifters. Am I right about that?
Yeah, we've been fighting them, and well, I mean, they didn't come back yesterday. Although we did like put corpses and things everywhere, trying to bait them out because we wanted some more.
I guess you routed them.
But man, I like, I don't know. I think it's kind of funny to watch, all of the, everyone kind of freaking out and stuff, and I can understand the Imperium's initial reaction, because that was like a slap, right? All of them were deployed up north, and they have hundreds of structures. And then all of a sudden, all their structures, they have what they keep saying, the 170 timers on the first day. And, it, but so we were getting hit, but we aren't deployed like that. We're deployed just a little bit north.
Mhm.
So we're able to come back, and we were fighting them for hours. And for us, it was just fun.
Well, hold on.
It
Let
was
me stop
interesting.
you
It was
there,
cool.
though. I think to me, there seems to be a problem there. Like, everybody's gone to war, so much so that nobody's at home defending the base. Seems like a bad game design, right? Like, all the farmers have used all the pitchforks and are up at the neighbor's regional hill.
I love that.
And a bunch of
metaphor,
wolves come into your farm, and there's nobody, not even the wives with rolling pins to fight off the wolves. Like, that seems like all or nothing, and that is a real symptom, I think, of one of the problems the game has right now. Is you need all your guys to do all the thing at the same time. To me, that makes the game seem very, very thin, very small, as opposed to a plethora of different things happening at the same time. But go ahead. So,
But it
Yeah,
also
no, I
means that
agree. That's interesting. Go ahead.
it also means that your security is the fact that you understand the system, right? You've gone through the work, and you know the security, and you understand all of the things that could possibly happen, and therefore you can basically leave your systems defenseless because you've done the calculations and you know that that's okay. And I think that that's the bigger problem, that you have that level of comfort that you can leave your stuff undefended, knowing full well that there probably won't be something bad happening. And then when something bad happens, that upsets the entire order of things because you're so used to building your systems on known calculations.
so when the unknown strikes at an unknown time, it's very disruptive.
Right.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, and so I completely understand, or I empathize with, what the Imperium, their reaction. For us, it was a lot of fun. Yeah, they hit a lot of structures, and we were fighting them, and we were dropping supers on them, and it was a great time. They dropped that blue sleeper loot, like 9 million or so per, and the salvage, though, like we were talking about that in chat earlier. If you use T1 salvagers on them, like you just don't, it's not worth it. But somebody was saying that if you use the T2s and you have good skills or whatever, and maybe rigs, like you can get decent salvage from them. But I don't know. They haven't come back yet. Uh, you know, I, I just kind of hope that it ramps up. I think that this is a great, interesting mechanic because you do need to have people, in the guard towers, right? You can't just abandon huge swaths of land and just say, "Oh no, it'll be fine."
Well,
So,
yeah.
and when a very small corp of like 10 people, and I'm not going to name them, they already know their names, of like 10 people can drop hundreds of structures a day and then not worry about it anymore, right? I think that there needs to be some cleanup crews, and I think
Like
this is a great mechanic for that.
like the perimeter police that you belong to, right?
Well, yeah, like the perimeter police that go around in high sec and hit, kind of random structures that are, trying to get in on the market that we want to not control because JITA controls the market. But second, we want to be second in that market. But like,
Mm.
all of these POS sticks sitting everywhere, all of these, low power structures, there's no one's going to unanchor them. No one's going to do anything about them. So they're just everywhere, everywhere. And, poor Brave, over there gets spammed with citadels. For 3 months, they were trying to clear out citadels, and the people would just drop more and more and more and
Mm.
more. And it just got ridiculous.
Every one
they're
of those,
literally cheaper than a single cap, right? So
and those citadels represent what? Why is that a problem to have that many?
because they
Yes,
represent 3
they're great
timers.
warp ends, right? And there's tethers, and they're
So,
like, kind of like little safety huts, I guess,
so that
sprinkled everywhere.
so there are strategic offensive possibilities in your systems. People can use them.
Yeah, I mean, having structures or having POSs in, and putting those in an enemy system is a very, kind of valid tactic, and we're using that now, right, as we place structures in Deterid. And
Mhm.
and as I was saying last night, if drifters are attacking our structures that we are placing strategically up north, and they get killed, so be it. I mean, I feel that one of the overarching rules of null-sec life is if you can't defend it, you don't deserve it. It's really that simple.
So how do you equate that to what's going on here?
I think a lot of us could consolidate more, right? A lot of us could shrink a little bit more. I mean, we don't need 25% of the map to be renters. That's silly. I think a lot of the movement, was helped with jump fatigue and things like that. But, having people consolidate and having people under constant attack by this kind of living, breathing sort of mechanic is super interesting. And, in our defense fleets, we get dropped on pretty consistently by very large, massive, fleets like 350 people. And having drifters is like fun. Oh hey, there's like 100 drifters over here. Oh, okay, cool. So we just drop supers on it. And they're actually really interesting NPCs because they're so fast and they are not housed, I guess you could say, in an anomaly or a room. So they warp all over and just constantly break your lock. So, it's a lot more tactical kind of fun, I guess,
Mhm.
PvE.
Are you guys
And
really having fun? Test really having fun fighting these guys, or is it a
oh,
pain?
we were cracking up. We were cracking up. Like it was super interesting. Like it was like a break, right, from the kind of monotony. Like
Mm.
we like we're just grateful to have
So,
null-sec space, man. We're not homeless, so
It,
we're
it's
already
funny.
winning.
It's funny because the people that are used to being the oppressors and attacking are the ones that are having the worst response to this, where the people that are used to being attacked are ramping to go.
they're okay with it. It's like, what's different? It's just the NPC. How funny.
I One thing that just reminded me of, and I don't know if this means anything yet, but so in the Triglavian sites, in the minor sites, it is not dead space, right? You can land and warp again once you've landed. But in the majors, it is dead space. And then, of course, the world arc is totally messed up. So it's very interesting that the Triglavians seem to be making Dead Space in some way. And it also seems odd that even though it is Dead Space, the Triglavians are still warping. So you were saying that it's not Dead Space, so the drifters can warp. I'm not convinced that they wouldn't still warp, even if it was Dead Space.
So here's a couple of the criticisms coming about this. One is that it's on the heels of CCP doing a little bit of a sales blunder. But anybody who knows about video game companies is the sales department doesn't always know what devs are up to or what the community even less is up to, right? Sales is its own thing. They're experimenting with packages. They incrementally move things. One of the things that happened in 2011, if we go back there for a second, was they were experimenting with microtransactions. Well, microtransactions were just a way of getting more money out of players. But what you guys need to look at is, how are they getting money out of us? Are they doing it through subscriptions? No, they're not. They're getting a ton of money through injectors. So what are injectors? Well, it's a monetization. Is it a microtransaction? Part of it is you can buy everything on the market, which is good. That's a nice threshold. And we like that, because then people who don't have to spend money to advance in the game don't have any blockages. But essentially, CCP's sales programs are encapsulating time, actual money, and in-game benefit. Those three things. That's a triangle. And they keep trying different things, right? In some sense, if you look at injectors, they are a form of encapsulated time, because they allow you to get something that you would normally have to wait for. And what is time but money in a very literal sense, right? Because you buy subscription time. And so in one way or another, you're going to end up paying for the skill points that you're trying to get. And what they did this time is they had a sale for $5. It was for it was called the beginner pack or something like that.
Starter pack.
Starter pack. So it assumes it's for people who are starting the game, except anybody could use it. And so they gave away 1 million skill points, right? So $5 essentially for 1 million skill points and a bunch of little other things that you really wouldn't use. And then CCP said, oh my God, that's a mistake, and people are upset about it. So let's do this drifter thing to kind of change the news cycle. Let's just throw out these drifters to do that. I think because it was a sloppy, I think people assume it was a sloppy deployment of the drifters. That's an assumption.
Yeah, so I'm going to speak to that, which is that there's one of two possibilities. Either CCP had this plan for at least several months, because it happens exactly on the 1 week Wednesday when it would be escalating past the hive, the drifter, or the world arc spawning, with more videos and stuff like that came out beforehand that kind of implied that it wasn't over, or they just had this in their back pocket and weren't using it and waiting it for X to happen. Like, I've heard so many narratives of like, X current event is the reason why drifters are attacking right now.
So those are the different reasons that people have shopped out. But what do you think is the truth of it?
I think that CCP is trying to tell a story, and they're trying to frame the drifters as an enemy and as a real threat again. I believe that what we're seeing now was actually planned over 4 years ago, because this matches what Highland Tukos was warning about in his final message. So I believe that the bugs that they ran into during the drifter invasion or drifter incursions caused a long delay, and we are now basically back to the point that we would have been at, or back then, right? So I believe that and even more importantly, this is chapter 1 of a story. So they have probably at least until the next expansion planned out of what's going to play out here. So what I see this as is the idea of, like, in any alien sci-fi story, when the alien shows up, it's always super powerful and super scary and can't be understood and can't be fought back against. But then there's a breakthrough that gives you some tool against them, and then you slowly build up, and then you fight, and then you then you gain control of their technology, and then you basically fight them as equals, right? So if that's the direction that we're going, if this is a Triglavian drifter war that we are being asked to take part in, then it would be helpful for CCP to establish the drifters as a real villain that has a real threat that is really pissed off a lot of players. So that way, when they become vulnerable to player action, when we are given the tools to deal with them, then it'll be personal and people will strike back.
I believe it's more simple. I think it just ties into what Hilmar said in Eve Down Under, that the metas become stale and they shouldn't be too afraid to do something drastic to kind of change it all up.
I think that's also going to be true for whatever the end state is of this. I just think that what we're seeing right now is almost certainly not the end state because it's not a feature. There's no reward, there's no counterplay, there's none of the hallmarks of a real feature.
Let me bring in a couple of new people here. This is a TIS original member, Caleb Arania. How you doing? Hey, man. And also want to bring in at this point Teddy, GBYC. I don't know how to say that. He is a wormholer. He just ran for CSM. And I think he's one of the leaders of a pretty significant wormhole company. How you doing, Teddy?
Hello, how you doing?
Good. Let me turn you up just a little bit. Okay. So I think, Caleb, this is something you probably want to talk about, right? The reasons that CCP are doing this, or I don't know, weigh in.
Well, my main problem with this is that it seems like one of those examples of CCP making features without thinking about the grand scheme of things. I don't know if they've planned it, but I just find it weird that you would plan something that's pretty much a man-hour sink, randomize it to the extent that it is, and then pretty much put the whole benefit in the hands of very man-hour strong null entities. I don't see how this is benefiting anyone. And then it seems to me like a PvP cockblock feature. So why would you do this? It doesn't help the game.
Does it need to benefit anyone though?
Well, it's a weird comment. It should benefit the ecosystem, and this disrupts it, right? I have not seen the numbers yet because there's no MER yet. But I'm sure that this is going to mean less actual real destruction because PvP is not happening as frequently. Maybe the not so strong PvP groups can pick up some of that slack in loss numbers, but it's still not going to be healthy. I'm sure that it's going to end up lower than when players are actually aggressive.
So when the drifters first started being introduced, they were first given to us in a series of like images that were like a slice of the concept art. So we saw like the nose of the ship, like the engine of the ship, and it was like all very confusing. But at the bottom of each one was a quote, and most of them were from Jamil Sorum. Quotes like, "You'll never know what they'll do out of self-defense. What you're doing is not genocide; it is worse than that." But one of them it says, "Victory will come not to the strongest or the brightest, but that who can most well adapt." And I think that that's what a lot of this is that it's not necessarily supposed to be rewarding on its own right, but all of you are facing the challenge. And I think that some of the problems that null-secers have built for themselves are in fact choices. So for instance, worst case scenario, right? You let them ref all your stuff. In theory, if your timers are set in a logical way, all you have to do is sit out your timers and defend it then against the drifters.
There are 3 timers, and you only have to show up for the last one, the one that counts.
No, what I'm saying is that like the shield one is the only one that you have no control over, right? Mm-hmm. So if they're going to bash you all night, but you have your armor timer in your main time, then let them just bash all your structures, and then all your trust structures will come out at their armor timer at roughly the same time in the same system, because the drifters are hitting the same systems over and over again. It's not like it's spreading out. You should be able to predict and control how this rolls out, and then you just have your squad defend them during that one block of time, instead of the entire time. But the problem is that null-seckers don't want to risk that because they see it as a further exposure that armor timer is one step closer to death. So what I'm saying is that there are some counterplay, or there are some ways to adjust or adapt to what was happening that I think that people were choosing not to do. But then again, I fully admit that of all of the people here, I'm probably the least knowledgeable person about how it's actually like to fight these things or deal with the problem.
Actually, I want to talk
But
to.
just from a law perspective, right? Does it make sense that an NPC entity in force can spawn into systems that, towards other players, are extremely well defended? I don't understand why this should make sense in any way or form.
I actually agree with you on that, which is why I'm very disappointed that this isn't triggered by a Drifter wormhole opening. Like when I first started hearing about this, that was my first thought. And the fact that that isn't true makes me very disappointed. That being said, we don't know. Maybe these guys are emerging out of the abyss, which would allow them to come from basically nowhere.
And then remember, when it's NPCs, right? Retaliation is meaningless, right? These people or these drifters can spawn for free, right? So any losses, they will not have any effects at all on the game. They don't bring any loot. They don't actually source any materials for actually making their stuff. There's no money or resources going in and out. So they are totally disrupting the whole ecosystem. Whereas if a player entity is attacking in 1DQ, right? There's going to be losses, and it's going to be felt on their side, right? You don't just aggress against a massive entity, and then you're not even talking about the meta narrative. If you are aggressing someone to this extent, if you were disrupting someone this much, there would be consequences, whether it's doing it towards NC, whether it's goons, any entity, there would be political consequences. NPCs don't have that, which makes it disruptive gameplay.
Well,
right.
Wait, we've heard there is some loot from these guys, so I don't know. Is there loot or is there not loot from?
No, it's special loot. He's saying because it's just standard blue loot, which is effectively bounties that aren't bounties.
Oh, so there's some, but there's some reward. They're just not empty. They're just not
Yeah,
empty.
we were getting like 9 mil, like on the battleships. It's that blue like sleeper loot, those little you know, like books kind of things. Yeah.
Okay.
It's blue loot.
It's not a lot, but it's something.
It's money in the bank. It's immune to market fluctuations because it's bought through NPC buy orders.
Now I want to turn to Teddy. Hold on a second, Caleb. Hold on.
Can I just?
You can finish this. Go ahead, finish this.
It's an ISK flow, right? It's ISK going into the game, not resources. So not anything that's game sensitive. It's inflating the economy, and it's really bad.
Okay, I know you're about the bigger themes, and we'll come back to that in a second. But I want to bring Teddy in here because we're talking about drifters, and some of the criticisms, Teddy, is that CCP has launched something that is essentially broken and doesn't have any meaning or whatever. And what do you think about that as a wormhole representative?
I mean, it's just normal. It's normal from CCP to release stuff that's broken. But
this is stuff that you deal with all the time, right? Something that's not completely working properly.
I mean, most things come out broken, but yeah.
I think invasions came out broken to some degree, and they got fixed over time, right? Ashrathi, am I wrong about that?
There were changes. Functionally, it worked. There were some tweaks here and there. It's very possible that Zorias were spawning at the beginning when they weren't supposed to because they pulled those back. And the biggest, most noteworthy ones were that the second phase just did not work. They tried to move up to Major's conduits twice. There were problems with the Major conduits completing, and it didn't actually move into stage 2 at all. And then the next week they just bumped it all the way to stage 3, and then it all worked. So there was that one serious issue for that second week, but otherwise it's all just been like tweaking the numbers to make sure that things are interesting and changing.
We had a scenario during the first week as well, after like 2 or 3 days, where there were just no sites whatsoever, or they just disappeared.
Teddy,
well, there was no sites at all the entire first week.
All right.
No.
Let me get in here. Let me get in here. Let me get in here.
Evasion zones.
Finally, I want to ask
Okay,
Teddy his
there you go.
point of view because I got to wrap it up pretty soon. I just want to know what Teddy's point of view is.
You were talking about like needing a villain. I think if they're kind of setting drifters up to be the perfect villain because they're horrible to kill, they're ridiculously overpowered. So like the entirety of Null-sec is now hating them. So they're now in effect like the perfect villain.
But if there's no reward,
I'll-
are people going to participate?
Well, I mean that's just a change to the loot table, but
Right.
that could be changed.
But also, survival is survival not a reward? Am I being too simplistic about that?
I think burning less than your enemy does because you adapt to it better is its own kind of reward.
So overall, Teddy, what do you think from your perspective? Like, how is this? I think you're slightly amused sitting back and looking at this. What do you think the reaction has been?
I mean, I know I'd probably hate it if it happened in Wormhole space, but it's interesting to see the different ways people are trying to deal with it.
Wait, say that again. Did you say people wouldn't care if this happened in wormhole space?
I can imagine it would be a hell of a lot harder to deal with if it happened in Wormhole space.
What do you think the reaction would be if this happened in wormhole space?
Probably the exact same.
From the wormhole players?
Because we have less tools to deal with this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So we'd pretty much just have to kill them with Fortizars.
Yeah, wormhole group with like 10 people.
Yeah, much smaller
have
groups.
a lot harder time defending their infrastructure.
I wonder, in fairness, like what the CSM would say if this was happening in wormhole space. I think they would say, yeah, we need to stop that, or this is not fair, or whatever. Like if there was some really like terrible things happening in wormhole space, do you think there would be a segment of Null-sec that would say like, hey, it's supposed to be hard in there? That was the whole idea.
Probably.
Yeah.
Like every time wormholes get affected.
Yeah, they say it's supposed to be tough. Suck it up. But I don't know. I guess it's not supposed to be tough in Null-sec. So this is a problem. CCP is the only one that can fix it, and they need to fix it. And if not, we're going to shoot this hostage high-sec.
Wow, it's not supposed to be hard in Null-sec. Okay, cool. Shots
I'm being
fired.
facetious. That's what all the messaging has been, isn't it? It's like, hey, this is not fun. This is not.
Null-sec is the new high-sec.
Yeah. I don't know. It's kind of what I'm hearing. I want to go back to Caleb if you're still there. What do you think this is in comparison to 2011, the Summer of Rage?
I don't think it's got that much of a comparison, except for the fact that the reaction emotionally and ideologically from the player base is almost as high. It's totally different because if you look at the Summer of Rage, it was a massive amount of features and effects that pretty much hit everyone in a broad way, right? So everyone was displeased in their own little way. Whereas this is the reverse, right? This is one feature that touches everyone differently.
Yeah. So you don't think it's comparable, but there is a lot of outrage over this.
Yeah, okay. Of course, the emotional outrage is maybe comparable, but I'm not even sure that that's comparable because if we go back and look at I think it was around the whole structures thing when that rolled out, there was also a lot of displeased and angry players, right? And the nerfs with the rock calls and all that. There's always something bringing around the player engagement when there's big changes. This is just a disruptive change, so the emotional response is so much bigger, I think.
And lastly, what do you think about this being an excuse to cartelize production and to take out high-sec as a competitor? Have you seen that video? Did we lose Caleb?
Well, I thought you were asking someone else.
No, I was asking you, your opinion, since you like to think of the game in long terms, like the long game.
Yeah, and I think Dirk and I have been talking about these issues for a long time, right? Like changes that CCP make that have massive macroeconomic effects down the line, like third, fourth, or fifth tier down the ecosystem, right? This whole thing, they just keep, I don't know if it's catering to some players and then missing the big picture, like small things like putting ISK faucets where there should not be ISK faucets, putting independence where there should be dependence. It's like, it seems to me like a lot of players, even a lot of null-sec entities, don't seem to understand that the easier they get things implemented, the easier it is for them to do things without any interaction with the rest of the player base, the less conflict drivers there's going to be and the less content there's going to be. Then you're going to have to get something like NPC content to actually keep people playing, right? And this is some of the things that Dirk and I talked about a lot, is the fact that things like making nerfing the ore distribution problem, so you've removed the bottlenecks on things like Tritanium and Mexilon, the fact that you can just keep piling miners into single areas, right? So you can have like 20 rocks mining in one system and it doesn't really deplete. You just cycle it because it's endless, right? All these design flaws CCP have been ignoring for years and years. Then they bring in something amazing like the whole moon mining, which is basically a player-driven spawn reset, right? Which is amazing as a concept. No other game has this, right? So that means that suddenly you have all nodes and resourcing being player dependent. And they don't bank on this. They don't push that further. They still leave in all the old broken ones.
It's interesting. So let me play something. I'm going to play a video here from, this is CCP at Ask Me Anything at Eve Down Under. And these are the comments that Hilmar made. And I want to put them in perspective. Somebody asks him, what's the problem with the game right now, especially in Null-sec? And why is there like a type of stagnation? This was a few weeks ago. And so we'll play his answer here. Whoops, just 1 second. Here we go.
If I maybe comment a little bit on why I believe it is the case, like what are the conditions that brought this about? I think we have, over the past 7-8 years, been giving too many tools to null-sec alliances to increase comfort. I think the first mistake was to
There's no audio.
symmetricize the mineral distribution, where people
There
get
is
self-sufficient for their resource acquisition in its region. The game was actually concretely designed to be the reverse, so that you would never be self-sufficient. So you would have to have access to the whole map, either through aggression or pact making. I think that's one condition. I think the soft system has been like stagnant in a way, where everything has kind of settled into a certain comfort zone. I think there are growth dynamics in the game. The game is maintaining its player base. It's not growing. And when you have a fixed map and a growing game, you almost force elements to untopple pretty regularly. And I think these conditions combined have brought about the stasis we're watching now. And I think if you systematically start to unwind that, we need to quote unquote fuck up with the mineral distribution. We need to do something with the soft system, which is, I don't really have an answer, but I think it's providing too much control and comfort. And then I think there are elements like how the local chat system creates even more mechanisms to provide control. I think we have to systematically unwind some of these things to bring about conflict again and make it scary again. And I think we need to get moving on that. And I would rather do the wrong thing and cause havoc rather than just watch it in fear and just, what should we do? So I don't like the idea of kicking the anthills and just, or put them aflame. But in the absence of any better idea, that is what needs to happen.
And there it is. I'll let you guys catch up.
That was almost verbatim what I just said.
Exactly. That's why I played it. I think you've been saying a lot of the same stuff. Is you need scarcity, you need distribution, causing people to have conflict over resources to keep the machines going. Everybody's fat and happy in their own territory these days, and that's just not a workable solution, because the incentives are to sit there and eat more and be fatter and happier. And the drifters are the first poke at that, right? Like saying, okay, you can be on your couch, but we're going to make it a little uncomfortable. We're going to turn up the heat. We're going to make the cushions not so soft, et cetera. And people got upset about it. So what happens when these bigger changes happen, where scarcity starts to actually enter into the picture?
Yeah, and just take the small example that I was trying to give when I was criticizing the fact that they put another ISK faucet into, the hands of Null. On an ideological sense, right, from the top of the system, you should consider actually removing all ISK printing from Null. And you should allow something like Blue Loot and similar things that needs to be handed in to be available in things like wormhole space. But actual ISK printing should only go on in HiSec, because then you have this whole pretty much a balance of payment thing where there's an actual trade or interaction going on between HiSecers that are printing ISK and not getting any resources really. They need to then give that ISK to the other entities so they can be incentivized to bring in the raw materials. So you get this triangle working, right? And of course, removing it entirely is stupid, because then you don't have any variations or variables in there. So, but from a general point of view, just doing that would change a lot. So if they just set all bounties now, tomorrow, to 0, and then made all ISK printing linked to some other HiSec activity, you would have a huge beneficial change to the game system.
I think CCP Siegel said something about like this in sort of 2016 during one of the FanFest keynotes.
Yeah, and way back in the day, this was pretty much the design ideology. This was what everything looked like until all the new features came in, right? Because, okay, if I'm not mistaken, the original ideas of Eve, the whole concept, right, was pretty well thought through, right, into a lot of degrees of detail. But it got lost around 5 years in, because they kept trying to tweak the game to make it more and more playable, which makes sense, but they did it on the back of losing all the good design.
Well, yeah, they gave groups, in particular Null-sec, increasing tools, because that was awesome and gave them power and gave players flexibility. But at a certain point, there's a cost to that. If you give players too much power and too much flexibility, then there's a great quote, and this actually comes all over Eve, and I can't think of who said it, but it's players will, given the opportunity, players will optimize themselves out of the fun.
That is a good quote. That exact thing you said at the end, that should be a quote.
It is. I just don't remember who said it.
Yeah, we got to attribute that to someone. That's brilliant.
I'll find it.
That's good stuff. It seems to be exactly what's happened.
If you want to go into the history that I know that Matterall loves, if you look at who's actually left CCP, right? If I'm not mistaken, a lot of these people were responsible for some of the grander visions of Eve.
Well, yeah, I would say it's hard to say. We don't work there. We don't know who propelled what and stuff. But you like Soundwave. I think your
some of us has
has
actually been around longer than most employees at CCP now.
Who has?
Some of us players have actually been in this game for longer than most CCP developers.
Yeah, and I think that's I think that's healthy on an individual level. You don't want to live at a company for 30 years anymore. It's not how the economy is built anymore around the world. But it does have a price to pay, right? Because you come in, I don't know if you ever come into a new situation, whether you start a new school, you start a new class, you start a new employment situation, you always feel like everything is running really well because you went to this place in the first place and everybody knows everybody. and it's all kind of done, right? Like you're coming into a situation, you're the one guy that doesn't know what's going on. And then after a while, you figure out like nobody knows what's going on, and nobody is friends with who you thought they were friends with. They're just acquaintances, and relationships aren't as deep as you thought. And you start to really figure out like, hey, this place isn't perfect. And then by the time you're ready to go from that job or ready to graduate from that school, you're like, I got this dialed in. I know exactly, where the knobs are to turn to get the results that I want. And I feel like CCPers that come in don't have that, senior knowledge of like, I know how this place runs. So they look to us, some of the players, to say like, well, these guys have been around for 10, 15 years. They must know some things that we don't. Or maybe they were around as players before they were on CCP. Who knows?
Well, you could almost say that there's a little bit of a feeling that CCP and Eve have suffered from its own success. It exploded very early on, and what happened was that some of the core designers seems to have been more and more responsible for actual administration stuff and corporate activities. And that means that they pretty much left everything in the hands of the interns. And this is what we're suffering from all the way up till today.
By the way,
So
go ahead.
So that quote was from Civilization game designer Warren Johnson.
Oh,
and the full
yeah.
What?
Go. Sorry.
Yeah, the full quote is, many players cannot help but approaching the game as an optimization puzzle. What gives the most reward for the least risk? What strategy provides the highest chance or even a guaranteed chance of success? Given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game.
Yeah. That is so true on an individual level and also on a group level. And EVE Online is just known for that. And the problem is...
And it's the long version of the Goon model, right?
It's not just the Goon model. It's been every model. It's just that the mechanics have changed to make the natural strengths of a group better. At a time, it was better to have more exclusive players that were good at the game and had the money and had the assets and had the skill points to be good together as a group. You still find that in Wormholes, I think. It's a dynamic of a small group and how well they work together. In Null-sec, that has changed to get the most amount of people you can get on top of a target or in the field at the same time or doing the thing at the same time, because it's a very flat system, right? There's not a lot of geography to Null-sec anymore, unfortunately. Money making anyway. There's ways that are optimized that you do it. Use a VNI or to rat on a small scale. You use 3 or 4 of those because you multi-box those. Or you use capitals, or then you use super capitals. And then, at a certain point, you're comfortable enough to use titans to just blast anomalies or whatever. And you're printing money, as you say. In that case, very few people could do it. But then when you have a group saying, we're going to ensure that for everybody, all our members, come to us, we're the place where you can print money in Null-sec. I'm talking about the Imperium here. And you advertise that, plays right into their strengths. They have the security threshold. They have enough people sitting around securing the place because you only need to do this one thing to secure it. And now you can grow that as big as possible with people coming saying, yeah, it's working. Let's go make our money over there. And a lot of people, I think, from HiSec went to Imperium to make money.
Yeah, but the main problem that arose from the whole big entities is the fact that CCP have, as I see it, forgotten to put in things like diminishing returns and depletion.
Yeah.
And they don't like to put in overheads. And the player base seems to oppose any suggestion of having things like overheads. But if you are against that, you're going to get the null blob phenomenon, right? Because something like the whole travel nerf, right? Where you add something like fatigue. Well, instead of having fatigue, if you had actual fuel costs that would be labor intensive and put in some overhead, then the entities that have the biggest space will have to jump the furthest. That means that they will have the biggest overheads. But they made this pretty much free or equal cost, right? Which means small entities will not have a benefit from only jumping in small ranges. So this is just an ideology problem again.
Mm-hmm. There's a few comments. I'm not going to respond to all of them, but it's one of them is like, well, welcome to empire building. That's what this game was made 4, I think. And what would you say to that? Kind of, look, you're supposed to build empires in null-sec space. Why are you saying that's a bad thing?
I would just caution people, anyone who wants to say what Eve is for.
Right. That's the first thing. I think the second
Empire
thing
building
is,
should be fun, but also difficult. And I
Yeah.
do think that a lot of entities in Null have proven time and time again that they are really, really good at doing that stuff. It's just when the ideological ideas of the game is broken, there will be emergent flaws, right? This is not the player's fault. It's CCP's fault.
well, it's an experiment, right? This entire thing is an experiment that keeps evolving. Players optimize something, CCP has to throw a wrench in it in some way, and it goes back and forth. They got themselves into a lot of what's called design debt, as CCP Fozzie put it, when they built the super capitals or the titans early on. They said these things are so hard to build, they take so much work that only an alliance or two will have one. And you can see that's many years later not the case at all. It's every person has 2 or 3 of them. Every person, not every alliance. Every corp has 20
Because
or
of
40
a change
of them.
that he actually made, right?
Because why?
It's because of a change that he made to a specific ship. It's pretty much all tied down to the raw core. The raw core pretty much broke the whole sourcing and resourcing for the big stuff in the game. So him saying that is irony on a whole nother level.
Well, not really, because they changed the design debt equation. What the capitals could do at the time, and how hard, they were immune to a lot of things, and they could deal out damage. First of all, to large groups, they could wipe out a fleet by themselves, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of that debt was slowly taken back. And they were essentially, I mean, super capitals are now subcaps, right? They're subcaps that have the ability to jump. But essentially it's the same thing. You have a goon swarm, right? Or you have a PL swarm of super capitals that are so numerous that really it's an impossibility to kill too many of them, especially with the way the faxes were set up or the force auxiliaries were set up just a few weeks ago. So if they're just subcaps, right, they can take gates, they can move around really quickly. Now they can get from the south to the north in less than 30 minutes or less than, let's just say less than 2 hours. When you have that kind of equation, a lot of that debt has been taken up. So then you can say, let's just have a lot of them. We don't want to balance, and they've said this before, on money.
Well, the whole problem comes down to the fact that when you're talking about a game like Eve that pretty much amasses wealth over time, you could just argue something like the inflation point, right? How much more material is accrued over time compared to how much is actually sunk out, and the same with the ISK, right? So the ISK faucet and the resource faucet. If this keeps going up and up and up, and blueprints are not changed at all, then it becomes relatively cheap in the end. If you then add in things like faster resource gathering to play some sort of catch up, which is valid, you need some sort of catch up mechanic so new players can actually catch up with players that have been amassing wealth for 5 or 10 years, right? So there is some logic to it, but if you have static blueprints, static production, then it will eventually break.
You also have the bottlenecks of the old ways are gone, right? There's no limits to how many things can be produced now. And you have an unlimited amount of raw materials that you can produce anywhere. Any place can generate that.
This ties into what I was banging on about a lot back when structures came in, that they suddenly added this infinite slot functionality. So slots for building and researching didn't have any value. If there is an abundance of something, it will go towards zero value, right? In the old days, you had 10 slots or 20 slots in a facility to build from. So it got plugged and people couldn't actually get access to it. So to break that, CCP brought in this infinite slot feature, which does actually make sense, but it didn't have any price sensitivity in it. Mm-hmm. And then when players got their hands on this feature, now you have an infinite resource that made the actual production facility worthless. There's no prioritizing. You don't have to decide whether you're building one ship or another, one type of ammo or another, because you can just add more alt accounts, right? Because it's fairly cheap to inject a new industrialist. So there's just so many of these philosophical changes that are bad. If they had added limitations to facilities again, especially when players got structures, you would suddenly have developed a whole new market where a player structure had value because of the facilities in it.
Right. That's interesting. Again, they don't want to design on money, because that means the people who can generate the money are going to get an advantage over people who can't generate that money. So those people can't keep up. And
no,
so,
but it's a mistrust in the dynamics and the effects of economies, right? They don't trust that economies are going to figure this out themselves. I know this is a very laissez-faire kind of economic comment, but it is true. It will actually find a new price finding point eventually, especially in a free market like Eve really is. There is no way of doing effective like corruption and broken crony capitalism like in the real world. It's very difficult in Eve, right? You can't do cartels in an effective way because you can always kind of break them, at least to some extent, except for the point where there's huge organizations that can collude and say, okay, we're just going to stop the flow of technetium and not put it in high-sec at all and just keep it to ourselves,
well,
which is a valid point, and it's emergent gameplay. This creates conflict. Why not have that? That's good.
Well, you have conflict, but then you have what we had then and what we have now, which is a collectivization of the people who have the power to defend the technetium at the time, right? So in 2013, it was let's make all this T2 material ours and let's dole it out and keep the price high, and everybody makes money. And now we're doing the same thing by attacking high-sec and wrecking their production ability, and then we'll control production as well as T2 minerals and stuff like that. So that's what happens. You get a bottleneck, you want people to possess it. Creates conflict, but when they unionize around it, you just have like a mob boss mentality. And
yeah, but
maybe that's okay.
When you're talking about things like mob boss mentality and things like cartels, right? It only takes one to stand up to the actual cartel or to the mob, and then there will be a piling on of the lesser entities, the people that have been suffering under this kind of activity, and there will be conflict. This is a very good thing, and it always tips the balance eventually.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so that's the thing that I caution the Imperium about the most about this, which is that I don't think, and also all of Null-sec, they want to get involved in. I don't think that you're sending the message to CCP that you think you are, because all of this stuff, at least the high-sec portion of it, is extraordinarily interesting emergent gameplay, right? So if this spurred that on, there's a very good possibility that CCP could look at that metric and be like, we got what we wanted, right? Like, so
and it's about creating difference, right? If you are spawning something like drifters everywhere, it's equal opportunity. It's going to flatten everything. If they said something like, okay, this is only going to spawn in high-sec, nothing spawns in sub-null, right? And then they added something like actual dropped loot, resource loot, that could be going into specific parts of the production line, then suddenly you would have potentially disrupted a monopoly. There's so many things you can do on a macro scale to kick the whole sandbox, but CCP seems to try too hard. They always try to fix something instead of adding content.
So, okay.
Yeah.
What? Go for it.
I was like, Caleb, I was practically running on that exact sentence, but for CSM. But go ahead, Ash.
So a bit of a prediction and a call out for help. So during the Drifter attacks, I had conflicting reports of whether or not they had overshields and doomsdays. The ones that did not have overshields did not seem to have doomsdays. In fact, we got a report from one person, I can't remember who, that said that different attacks had different drifters. So they saw both overshields and doomsdays and no overshields and no doomsdays. The videos and images that I've seen from the drifters attacks, the drifters have visible hull damage. I have not gotten any confirmation about whether or not the drifters with overshields still had visible hull damage. This is kind of important. So when the drifters first encountered the Triglavians and we started seeing the death balls, then one of the notable things was they were visibly damaged and they have no doomstays. In the Abyss, they are visibly damaged and have no doomstays. Ones with the overshields do have doomstays, and the doomstays are attached to the overshields. My assumption, since we're seeing both, is that it is possible that some of the drifters have already encountered the Triglavians and some have not. And it could very well be that the Triglavians have some sort of technology that's able to disrupt the drifters' superpowers, including their overshields and doomstays. In the latest 2 videos that we received from the Triglavians, we not only got the Zoria Triglov video that was played at Eve North, but we also got one of their schematic videos that showed a new thing that we've never seen before that looks like a structure. So it is very possible that the Triglavians are going to be somehow introducing a new structure. This could even be associated with maybe changes to local, since it has to do with whether or not you can find things. And also, Upwell has been working with cloaking technology. So there's a lot of stuff going on right now that this may be a piece of the puzzle to. And it's too early to tell, but I'm just wanted to make sure that those pieces were known, so that way, because there's a lot of things that are outside of the vision of most of the people that are trying to deal with this situation.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up. We have less than 10 minutes, and I want to thank everybody who's come to watch for participating. I have really good numbers of viewers today, a lot of activity in chat and in public chat, and I'm sure it will continue after this show. But I am going to wrap it up. Last question to you guys. What do you think is going to happen on Wednesday, and why is that important, the day Wednesday?
I believe that on Tuesday, so tomorrow, we will receive another communication from the Triglavians. And I believe on Wednesday, we may actually get like first contact in which we can actually begin to join the flow, as it were.
Join the flow, which means join the fight against drifters.
We assume so. The final message of, like, they refer to this thing called the flow, and they say, Neurodnia, which is us, with fitness will be, or Neurodnia worthy will be fit to enter into the flow of Viraj. Neurodnia without fitness will be expelled from the flow. So they've referred to this thing called the flow a lot, and it seems like their path or their destiny or their goals or their religion. And their final statement to us, the final line of the final statement is, you will join the flow or be extirpated.
Mm-hmm. So that's coming up. There's a little confusion. Is that coming up downtime today or tomorrow? Do we think that's coming?
I'm sorry?
Do we think that's coming after downtime today?
The message from the Triglavians can show up at any time on Tuesday.
In other words, after this next downtime.
Yes, sometime during the main day of Tuesday. What they do is everybody who has a Semiosis console receives a Eve mail from one of the 3 clades, depending on which Semiosis console you have. Mm-hmm. And that Eve mail has a URL which links to the video.
Okay. Tuesday, Wednesday. Anyway, look for it. It's going to be in the next 48 hours. Something may change because it's been changing every week at around this time. So look for it. Caleb or Teddy, do you guys have any predictions on what's going to happen in the near future?
Oh, I only have the comment to Ash. I love hearing him rant about lore, and I like what the lore players are doing in the game. I just don't give CCP that much credit that they have all these massive plans and they have everything ready to suddenly make sense. I get the feeling that more than 50% of the actual lore is written by the player base, and this is just knee-jerk stuff from CCP. I'm not expecting anything that makes sense the next week or 2.
I would very much like to either see Drifters or the Sancha invade either Wormhole Space or Null-sec.
Yeah,
because we know the three races that have been like fighting each other: the Drifters, the Trigs, and the Sancha have been fighting each other.
There is precedent for Sancha to be attacking in Null-sec. Case Green Magic is in fact Sancha attacking shipping lanes in southern Null-sec, like around Molten Heath, on through to another place.
Very interesting. So we'll have to wait and see. That's the report for today, Tuesday, July 2nd. We will be back in a couple days, I guess on July 4th. Thursday, we'll try to do another stream. And then Talking in Station Season 3 starts this Sunday. We're asking some guests to join us, and we will be on again for another season. Look for new stuff that's coming out, and we're excited to tell you about that on Sunday. Thank Ashtarothi, Caleb, Teddy, Amar, and all the guys talking in stations, and you, the viewers who are listening in. And we're going to put this out on YouTube, and I think we're going to start putting these things out on podcast for some of you that want to watch these, want to listen to these as you're taking long drives or working out or something like that. I think we're going to start doing that. Anyway, thank you guys very much for hanging out. Please feel free to jump into Public Voice and hang out in public at Talking in Stations Discord. We will see you guys next time.